a few things that will happen just beforehand. We are actually going to record this programme, an event, so then people can actually access it at a later time, and you can share it on to staff meetings or people who couldn't attend tonight. We're also going to screenshot a few times because we have a report to write at the end of the year, don't we, Claire? And having this screenshot will give us some evidence to actually send to the early years team to show what a fantastic job we're doing. So we will be screenshotting it. There's also the chat facility, which is on the side. You're more than welcome to ask any questions or anything that you don't understand, and we'll try our best to try and answer. If not, I'm sure the early years team will be very knowledgeable in answering that. All right. If before we, or as we're starting, can you please write in the chat your name and the setting which you're from? So then we've got an idea of what broad curriculum we've got. We've got teachers, we've got childminders, we've got settings. Also, if you have got one person who's booked in, but 10 people in the background watching, can you put their names as well for us? So then we've got an actual idea of how many people have attended. So I'm going to hand over now to Alison Jeffrey and Jo Sawyer, who very kindly have put this together for us. So thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you. Thanks for that, everybody. I think I'll just hand it over to you to carry on with that introduction, because that was probably much better than mine's going to be. But thank you. No, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, and thank you to the CIC leads for inviting us to work with you this evening. Obviously, you've just heard who we are. My name's Jo Sawyer. I'm an early years locality officer in the early years team, and some of you might know me. I did cover the area you're in previous to when we went to the link worker approach. So at the moment I cover the Yeovil area and Hewish as well, but I do work quite closely still with childminders in your area. So that's me. And then obviously we've got Alison. Alison, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi everybody. A really warm welcome to you all. I'm Alison Jeffrey. I'm early years lead in the local authority, and also one of the strategic managers in Amelia Walker's team in education partnerships and skills. Yeah, working closely with Chard, Ilminster and Crewkerne. You're really lucky to have such a proactive early years community, and tonight is an example of that. They've asked us to put on some specific content based on your needs. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Alison, just want you to know we've just lost the presentation. I don't know about everybody else, but I've got a funny feeling somebody pressed take control by mistake. And now they've come out of it, so we've lost. There we go. We're coming back. Sorry about this, everybody. There's always a few gremlins in the system. There we go. We're back on. Yeah. Okay. So this session is going to focus around supporting progress in the prime areas. And, we're going to be focusing on two things interwoven throughout the session: the staff team and that reflection by the whole team, including the senior management team. And there'll be lots of reflective questions and pointers for you to take away and use appropriately, in your setting, individually as a childminder, or networking with other childminders to help you develop and support your practice. This is being recorded, as you've already heard, but also we will send out the slides to your leads and they can distribute them out to all of you. But I must say, credit goes to Nikki Difford, who actually put this presentation together. Alison and I are basically the messengers tonight. She's worked extremely hard this week, burning the midnight oil to put this together for you. So a big shout out to her, must definitely say that. And obviously tonight you're listing who you are, what setting you're from, and okay, that's what we're seeing, but we don't know what your levels of experience are, your levels of knowledge, the specific skills you bring to early years. So hopefully you will get something from tonight, and it will be beneficial for you. Unfortunately, the Dell Teams housekeeping slide has to come in because it helps us to hopefully run the evening smoothly. And we've already had one gremlin. Let's hope we don't have any more. Please keep your cameras off and microphones muted. We love seeing you all, and we wish we were face to face this evening, but it does help with the IT functionalities and everything, and if everybody's got everything on, we might lose some of you, or even lose myself or Alison, and we don't want that to happen. We really don't. But please engage with us. Use the chat function, which you're all seeing. If you really would like to come on and speak, use the hands up function, which is at the top of your screen or somewhere on your screen, depending on what device you're using. There are ways to communicate with us, you know, butt in, put your hand up at any point if you've got something really you'd like to challenge us with, or even something from your experience that links specifically to what we're talking about at that time. Please, please, please. And again, at the end of the session, we will probably say this, but you know, if there's something specific to your provision that you'd like to discuss more in depth after this, please get in touch with myself or Alison, or if you miss any of the contact details, get in touch with your link worker and they can, you know, pass us on to us. So please do that. We aim to finish by 8:30, so we're going to be quite swift and pretty prompt with what we're doing tonight. Thank you. So like I said, we're here tonight to work through supporting progression in the prime areas, and these are the key areas what we'll be looking at. The 3 prime areas and exploring their properties within the educational programs, how to support progression within the areas, pedagogy and how it supports progression, the importance of an enabling environment to develop the prime areas and all areas of learning as well, and the supporting documentation. So hopefully this is what you're here for, and we hopefully that you will enjoy the session this evening. Alison and I are going to take it in turns to deliver certain sections, so thank you for all being here, and I'm going to hand back to Alison now.
Thanks, Jo. Okay, so let's kick off. I don't need to tell you this, but everything about your provision and how you implement your learning for the children is absolutely personal to you and your setting. This is a fantastic photo here by one of our providers. They've given us permission, by the way, to use this. Together they achieved an award, Excellence in CPD, so continuing professional development. So they worked together as a staff team to really think about what each member of the team needed, how to plan for that, how to improve everybody's learning, and ultimately they achieved this Excellence in CPD award. So it's absolutely fantastic. But no one does everything in the same way, and that's due to a whole variety of reasons, including skills within your team, the knowledge of the people in your team, how confident people are to deliver, the children and the families that attend your setting, so your cohorts, also the demographics of your area, so how affluent or disadvantaged, rural, urban, many, many more apply to you and the area that you provide, your setting. Time to embed new practices and how you support one another and what support comes to you from your senior leaders. This also applies to progression. So we're talking about progression in all manner of kind of different ways tonight. And what we wanted to say, you know, right from the hearsay is progression, you can't get it off a shelf, unfortunately. Some areas of learning are definitely easier to show progression as learning is more fixed. But generally, all of these different things on this screen, on this slide rather, and all the things I said are very personal to your setting and therefore will have an impact on what progression also looks like for your learners, for your children, for all those reasons stated. Let's start with the senior leaders in your teams, the senior leaders in your settings. As a childminder, perhaps you're working with other childminders in your area. Perhaps there's a lead childminder. We always used to have those, but maybe there's somebody who you look to for support and advice, etc. What we want to see, what we would really love to see in all settings, and what Ofsted certainly will be looking out for, is how leaders focus on improving practitioners' knowledge of the areas of learning, understanding of how children learn to enhance the teaching of the curriculum and appropriate use of assessment. So you can see straight away, it's about how leaders help the staff team and how the staff team together, therefore, understand child development as the very basic core knowledge that you need, and then apply that to how you teach each area of the area of learning and what curriculum looks like in your setting. That's very unique to each of you. What we're hoping to do tonight is pick apart some of that so it becomes a little bit more easy and apparent as to how to start about it or continue it if you've already started. The blue quote up there is, it's to provide a focus for professional development activities, particularly in relation to increasing children's vocabulary and cultural capital. There's bags of progression involved in those things as well. You know, progression in vocabulary, progression in cultural capital, those really rich first-hand experiences that your children have accessed already or need some access to help them learn. In orange, it's all about practitioner subject, pedagogical content and knowledge, and that consistently builds and develops over time. And this consistently translates into improvements in the teaching of the curriculum. So we really want that. So how do your leaders, how do you support yourself? Where do you find that information? How are you moving forward with it? And ultimately, Ofsted want to know how well staff know the children. We want to find out what it is you want them to learn, know and develop, and you will be asked. We know that, and there are early indications of the inspection framework being put into inspections since September 2021 have absolutely confirmed that. So it's all about you knowing what it is you're teaching your children and why, and ultimately at the heart of that is progression. So we wanted to remind you, draw your attention back to some of the statutory and non-statutory documentation. And all of these, without exception, have children's progression and learning and curriculum at the heart. We all know about the statutory early years foundation stage. That was obviously launched again this year as a new document or revised documents. That is the law. It's the must-dos. The Early Years Inspection Handbook was updated in 2019, and that really does show that Ofsted and the DFE are talking together about what they want to see in terms of children's learning. And again, progression is at the heart of that. They want to see that you know how you can help your children to progress. And then all of these non-statutory documentations that sit around it, some of them you might know better than others. Obviously, Development Matters. We know a lot of our providers are using Development Matters as a supporting document to the EYFS. Birth to 5 is there as well. Not one that's kind of been highlighted as much as Development Matters, but is certainly really useful when you're starting to pick apart content, progression, etc. Up in the top right-hand corner, what to expect in the early years foundation stage. So that's a new version of what to expect when. Lots of our providers use that. It's often out in your reception areas. It's there as a supporting tool for your parents. It's basic child development in parent-friendly speak. But ultimately, at the heart of it, it's progression of skills and knowledge that children need. And that is ultimately what child development is. We then have Birth to 5 Matters. Sorry, we've said that one. From Birth to 5 Years, that's the 3rd edition. That's quite an old one, actually, but still really, really relevant from Mary Sheridan. And then ultimately some of the additional documents that Julian Grenier has brought out, and hopefully all of you will have at least heard about, working with the revised early years foundation stage principles into practice. So all of these, as I've said, will help you to understand varying aspects in varying detail of child progression and in terms of progression of knowledge, skills, and ultimately learning, which is child development. So moving back to Ofsted, and we don't do everything for Ofsted, but ultimately we want to give a good impression, and ultimately what they're looking for is what we would want for us to have in our settings anyway, because it's supporting our children. So the 3 I's, many of you will know them and have already been kind of thinking about it, but do your staff teams know them? If not, leaders, supervisors, whoever kind of leads CPD in your settings need to make sure that everybody is aware of these 3 I's, because they tell us what children need to learn, why they're learning it, how they're learning it, and what the impact is. So the intent, it is your curriculum design. It's the coverage of learning and knowledge and understanding, and the appropriateness to the cohort of children that you have. So again, coming back to those really unique factors for your setting, all of those, in the appropriateness, absolutely. How is it appropriate to those learners? Okay, you may have some children with SEND, you might have children from disadvantaged backgrounds that are coming to you with low levels of language. You might have other children that are exceeding all levels of development. Okay, so you need to know your children to know what intent should look like in your setting. Once you know that, you can then think about implementation. So how is it you are going to impart this knowledge onto the children? How are you going to help them progress? And that's through your curriculum delivery, your teaching, because you are teachers, although that term doesn't often apply to you in the early years. It's absolutely true. We are all teachers. That's your pedagogy, your pedagogical approaches, and then ultimately the assessment. So when is it pertinent to check what children know and understand? And then therefore the impact will come quite naturally from that. So you should see on a daily basis what impact that's having in the way that the children are interacting, how they're embedded in terms of engaging with your resources, telling you what they know, etc. All those things that we look out for. And that includes attainment and progression, the knowledge and skills that they have learned, and their readiness for the next stage of education, whether that be going up to reception class or going up to year 1, which is where the term from the DfE school readiness applies. It is the educational programmes that these 3 I's basically then move on to. Communication and language. This is the first of the prime areas. This is the educational programme. So if you haven't already looked at these, if your staff team haven't read them, and more importantly, if you don't understand them, this is where we all need to start when looking at our curriculum design and what we're putting in place to ensure progression of learning for all children. So in this particular area of learning, communication and language, this is your scaffold. This is what you have to have by law in place for your children. Obviously, this educational programme is for the entirety of the early years foundation stage up until the end of reception year. So again, you need to think about the children that you are teaching, the age of those children, and the varying degrees in which these things will be being put into place. So we've highlighted some of the content here. Foundations for language and cognitive development, build children's language effectively, use and embed new words in a range of contexts, and at the bottom, children become comfortable using a rich range of vocabulary and language structures. When we start to look at and obviously there's a whole load of other things there you can see with the amount of text on the page, but when we start to pull apart some of the things highlighted there, you start to then think about what progression might look like. What do you need to put into place? What do children need to learn in order to get to these things? So the last sentence there, children become comfortable using a rich range of vocabulary and language structures. Well, we've clearly got to introduce language to them and vocabulary, okay, before they can actually get to that aspect of the educational programme. So you can start to see by unpicking it, you need to start small, you need to progress in small steps, adding things in along the way in terms of language and vocabulary, making sure your staff team are aware which words perhaps you're going to want to pull out of the stories you're reading, the new language you want to put into play, and then hopefully you'll start to see in continuous provision how the children are displaying that. So again, you've gone right the way from intent to your implementation and then to your impact. Next one of the prime areas as another example. So personal, social and emotional development. Again, all of this on this page is statutory. We must have it in place and children must have been exposed to it by the end of the foundation stage and the end of reception. And again, we've pulled out a few examples here. One thing that I'd like to kind of highlight first is direct attention. So this one can be really quite a tricky one, because there's quite a lot of self-regulation in here, isn't there? There's quite a lot of children needing to know themselves as learners, and needing to know the routines of your setting, and therefore being able to direct their attention at appropriate times, etc. So again, through what I'm starting to say, hopefully you're drawing out the small steps of progress that children will need to make in order to direct their attention for any length of time. So starting from the very smallest opportunities, if you have babies in your setting, those babies looking at you, giving them eye contact, then making facial expressions, you making those facial expressions back, they're paying attention to you in a small way. And then you can start to see as we build up to 3 and 4 year olds, when they're sitting in a group activity, when they're listening to a story, how long are they actually giving you their direct attention for? Are they actually taking on board what you're saying, and are they making commentary back? So you can start to see the progression from the smallest of babies through to 3 and 4 year olds, and then ultimately when they're at the end of reception year, what we want them to be able to achieve is to really direct their attention for longer periods of time, so that when they go into access the national curriculum, they're able to do so much more easily. So you can just start by saying that the educational programmes, and this is what we're advising everybody, start with these, pick apart the different elements and aspects of it, and start to think about what progression looks like in your setting already, and if there are any gaps, what we need to do to support further progression in each of those aspects.
Alison, can I just interrupt? We've got a comment in the chat saying that the slide's not matching up with the commentary. You're on, I'm seeing, I don't know if everybody else could give a thumbs up, the PSED slide at the moment. Is everybody else seeing that one, which would be matching with what? Yeah, thumbs up.
All I can say, if anybody's kind of like not seeing the right slide, it might be better just to come out and come back in again, because it might be a tech gremlin from your end.
Yeah.
But yes, you should be seeing PSED. I'm going to move it on. Let's
Thank you, everybody. Sorry for the interruption.
No, please don't worry. Let's see whether the next slide comes on. Hopefully everyone should be seeing the same kind of slide on physical development now. Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
So physical development now, again, in the same way, we've kind of just highlighted a few bits there to start you to thinking about what progression might look like and the kinds of things you need to put into place. Now, Julian Grenier, I don't know, maybe I'm saying the same thing over again, but just to illustrate our point, when you're thinking about gross and fine motor skills, let's focus on the gross skills first. We all know that children need to make big movements and they need to develop their muscles in their bodies in order to even think about holding a pencil in the correct way and start to write. So, gross motor skills. One of the curricular aims in your setting might be that children ride a two-wheel bike without stabilizers. It might not be, but it might be. So once you have that curricular goal in place, you need to think of the steps of learning knowledge and skills that children need to take to get to that end point. Okay, so again, just reminding you that these, this is, everything that needs to be taught to children by the end of reception. So we're hoping children of the age of 5/6 are going to be riding a bike. We'd love that, wouldn't we? Because often we realise that children don't have that opportunity. So in our settings, we're giving them that rich first-hand experience, hopefully to ride a bike. Let's think back to the earliest opportunity to start progression of skills. So not only do children need to develop those muscles, so all of those big play things you do, climbing, running, jumping, are going to be the first steps to children actually being able to ride a bike. And then once they get onto a wheeled vehicle, it might start off like a trike. It might then progress to a scooter, but ultimately you want to go on a balance bike. Balance bikes are brilliant for giving children the centre of gravity, getting that feeling, being able to control a bike without having to think about pedaling at the same time. Then you get up to a bike with pedals, with stabilizers rather, and then ultimately with enough practice and enough support and scaffolding, a child will be able to ride a two-wheel bike without stabilizers. So again, starting to pick apart some of these things, we can then think about the content, the progression of skills and knowledge that children need. And you may want to list some of those down if it's helpful to you and your teams. Okay, so we're going to give you time, we're going to have quite a few of these reflection points throughout this evening. I want you to kind of take time out now just to have a bit of a think about your curriculum as it stands. And I appreciate quite early days in terms of the EYFS 2021. You might not have everything as you really want it. So we do understand that. But take time to consider the following. What are the needs of your specific children? So what experiences have children already had that you wish to enhance and embed? So they may have had experiences at home. They may have been to fireworks recently. They may have been to a Remembrance Day parade. Those rich first-hand experiences, have they had anything recently? And would you want to enhance and embed that in your provision at your setting? And the second point there, what is missing from their understanding and cultural capital that you as a school or setting feel is important? So those children who may not have access to those experiences, what have you got to plug the gap with? What's the kind of things that you could introduce? So just take a couple of minutes to think about some of the cohorts that you have, their experiences or lack of experiences, and therefore what you're doing in setting to support that. And we'd love to hear within the chat, or if you're brave enough to put your hand up and come and tell us out loud, I'll give you a couple of minutes just to think about that. Anybody got anything they want to feedback? If you've seen our effective interactions training, you'll know that silence sometimes can be a bit awkward, but we need to give people the opportunity to think properly, thoroughly through things, just like children need to, before they can respond. So anybody, I mean, it might just be an example of something that you've done on the back of a child's interests that you've popped into your provision. give them a really good experience at nursery, preschool, school, or in your childminding.
Hi, yeah, it's Jenny from St Bart's.
Thank you, Jenny.
That's all right. We well, linked to what you said about the fireworks, it popped into my mind that we did sparklers at school, and I thought that was quite important for them in terms of risk taking, what appropriate risk taking with support of a guided adult. It was exciting, and I think sometimes currently in the things are not as exciting for some families outside of school as well. So it's important to give them those experiences that they might not be having. Obviously, some families are still worried about going to firework displays and stuff like that. So we thought we'd bring that to them. And it was very successful, bless them. And the other thing that's missing from our children's understanding is getting changed for PE. So we've really focused on that, and we've been quite collaborative with parents, and it seems to be taking us a really long time at the moment, bless them. But then again, I don't think people have had to put coats on and get changed. I think families have been at home, and perhaps parents have done it for them, bless them. So it's not anybody's fault, but that's just in our setting, that's what we're really working hard on, to give them those experiences to help them progress in those areas.
Brilliant. Those are great examples, and you know, obviously coming back to PSED in terms of what you need to add in based on the cohort of children you've got and the needs at any particular time. So yeah, that's a really great example, and something that we try and tell people, and practitioners as well, sometimes guilty of this, because we're always in such a rush, aren't we? The routines of the day are always so pressured, but never do for a child what they can do for themselves. What we're ultimately trying to do is install these independent skills on them, or skills of independence. And in that case, you're absolutely right. You know, parents potentially over COVID have just done way more for their children than they would have normally, and that, unfortunately, as a cohort, we're seeing that coming through. Thank you for that. Penny in the chat has said, we took the children to visit the library, very successful. Next time, to enhance the experience, we'll ask the librarian to read to the children. Fantastic. Yeah, really, really great. It's such an easy, free and engaging activity to take to children to, because a lot of them probably won't have ever visited a library and certainly won't know what it's for. So yeah, absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Penny. So you will get these slides at the end of tonight's session. So, you know, take time if you can to put some of these reflection points into your team meetings, your staff meetings, meetings with other childminders in the community, etc. Because, you know, it's a good opportunity to start conversations, find out some good practice, and ultimately build on what you already know. Okay. So I'm going to hand it over to Jo for a few slides.
Thank you, Alison. Brilliant starting points. Excellent. And thank you for those who contributed. Really useful and interesting bits of information there. So we're going to now think about that progress and assessment. Obviously, we're all in this business to help the children progress. And we know for progress to occur, we have to assess the children. And immediately, I know many practitioners we've been speaking to since the revised EYFS has come in, you know, they're concerned about how much assessment they should be doing, as in recording of it. And we will touch on that in this section now. But what we need to think about is in the blue bubbles here, you can see this, it's a summary from the EYFS statutory framework of what we must be doing with regards to assessment. You know, they recognise it plays that important part in helping practitioners to recognise the children's progress, and it involves us knowing children's level of achievement and interest. So it's that ongoing assessment that might be in the moment. It might be what many of us call a wow moment. I know some of you have different terms for that. Yeah, it's about what happens when we see it and we know the children so well, we know that they have made progress. Or we can identify possibly that they're not making as much progress as they should. So we need to consider what are we going to do to address that and to support them sensitively in moving forward. You know, this can happen, like I've said, in the moment, written. There's many different ways of doing your assessment and recording it or logging it to support the progression. And when assessing whether an individual child is at the expected level of development, practitioners should draw on their knowledge of the child and their own expert professional judgment as well. So it's about us having those skills and knowledge in, at the end of the day, basic child development. You know, use those supporting documents that Alison's mentioned. They are great and fantastic to support you with where should the child be going on their learning journey, where should they be going next. And the quote, as you can see, we're back to Julian Grenier again. You know, assessment is about individual children and not those rows and rows of data. You know, if you are using a form of data, we're not saying you shouldn't, but think back to that paragraph, that sentence that we keep quoting from the statutory framework now, that assessment should not entail prolonged breaks from interaction with children nor require excessive paperwork. So it's about thinking, you know, when we go to visit settings now, if we walk in and we see every practitioner with their heads down looking at an iPad, you know, frantically filling out 20 observations on tapestry, don't worry, I haven't seen that happen. But, you know, we would be concerned because those quality interactions, those observations, those in the moment assessments with the children would not be occurring and helping, you know, towards progression in whatever area of learning they were engaged in. And it, again, it's this word knowing, it just keeps coming up everywhere, doesn't it? Knowing which children are getting on well, so we can continue to challenge and stimulate them, and knowing about those who are slightly more vulnerable. They may be at risk of poor progress. And I'm sure as I'm talking about this, you know, those children who need to be continue to be challenged, those at risk of poor progress, you're immediately thinking and seeing images of those children. So it's really important to think about this. But key points here with that assessment to support with progress is practitioners need to know children's level of achievement. So again, knowing the child. They need to know the individual child, is at that expected level of development, and staff must be confident in their professional knowledge and judgments. I've visited a few settings over the last few months, obviously virtually, and I've managed to do a couple of face-to-face socially distanced meetings with a couple of managers, and one manager was particularly concerned on how they were going to demonstrate they knew the child without writing reams and reams of observations. So I sort of put her on the spot a little bit, and I said to me, okay, I said, how many key children have you got? She said, how many? I said, right, name one of the girls. So she named one of the girls. I said, right, tell me now, give me a learning story about her, because she was returning after the summer break. And the manager spoke confidently, and she knew that child inside out, and she hoped that from where she left off in July, when she came back in September, she knew exactly what that child hopefully would come back with, ready to go, and the next step she was going to support her with to progress in her learning. And at the end of that conversation I said, you know it? And she said, oh yes, I do, don't I? That's what I need to be doing. And yes, recording some elements of assessment in, perhaps they use, at that setting I'm talking about, they use just sort of scrapbooks / learning journeys, whatever you might call them. But it's about that confidence and being confident in professional knowledge and you know, and judgments as well. And that leads on very nicely to the next slide, which is about having confident staff in the team. Again, a great selection of reflective questions here. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. Obviously, you can take some time to read them, but great that you could take these back to a staff meeting. You know, as a childminder, ask yourself these questions, or if you link up with others, ask others, you know, how secure are you in really knowing those children? You know, when those children start with you, how do you build those relationships with parents to create that really good rounded approach to getting to know the families and the children? Because it's so important. Are staff secure in understanding child development? You might have staff who are new to the EYFS returning to the EYFS after a break, for example, or apprentices fresh out of college, so they might need that little bit of extra support. They might need some additional training or possibly coaching or mentoring. Confidence again in own professional judgments, personal judgments, awareness of theories, securing staff, knowing the processes for getting those extra support. Do you discuss this with staff? Are they aware of it? Do you use supervisions effectively to know what CPD staff need to boost their confidence? Are they valued as well, staff? That's really important. Are they all given the opportunity to have a go at, for example, delivering activities or stories and things, things like that? And how are staff offered training opportunities? Hopefully via their early years communities. That's why some of them are here tonight. But also, staff being confident in their personal judgments. Do you, moderate and sort of have those discussions about how they, how confident they are in the knowledge of child development, and how they identify which children maybe are not making as good a progress as possible. And then you can plan that intervention. And I'm not talking always about an outside agency, or referrals, talking about in the moment, in the setting. In many schools, teachers will meet with senior leadership team at pupil progress meetings to identify those children, and also those ones who are doing extremely well to make sure they're being challenged, etc. Could you do your own form of pupil progress meetings? Call them whatever you'd like to call them, but to make sure you are confident in your judgments of what the children are doing to support their progression. Just something to think about, and reflective points there for you to take away. So now we're going to move on to looking at considering about the progress we want children to make in each of the prime areas, obviously focusing on this evening. The key points on the slide there are a summary from the educational programmes, obviously what you saw on the previous slides, and they are in the statutory framework and at the start of each area of learning in the development matters as well. It's a huge paragraph of text. So Nikki very kindly here has summarised it with sort of the key points here about what we want those children to learn, and what does staff need to know to be able to support the progress in these areas. It's really, really important. They need to know, and now hopefully we're going to have a little bit of animation now as the bubbles come in. Here they come. So they need to know about stages of speech and language development. Are they confident in this? They need to know those barriers which impact on speech and language. So things, for example, we all know these dummies, non-communicative home environments, the parent who's always on their phone, those electronic devices that the child may be sort of put in front of to sort of, excuse me, inverted commas, babysit for them. Thinking about that. Knowing where to go for that support. There's lots of documentation out there that can support with, in-house knowledge of communication and language, for example, your ECAT, but also documents such as University Speaking, and ICANN have a fantastic poster and many resources for stages of speech and development, and they're not just useful to use with the parents, but also useful for the practitioners, just to, oh, I'm saying that. Can I just check that? Is that where that child should be? Really, really useful to have in a staff room, or, accessible for all staff to do. And are staff aware of the processes in the setting if they are concerned about one of their key child? Who do they go and speak to? Do they know who the SENCO is if it's a large setting? As a childminder, for example, do you know where to go to for support? Hopefully you come to us and give us a call, your link worker, and then we would signpost you or help you with that. But do you know? It's really something to think about. And obviously within a setting, within an early years community, within your smaller networks, because I know many childminders meet in smaller groups, so do some nursery practitioners. Can you do sort of coaching and mentoring amongst yourselves in your setting? And there is so much CPD out there now. We have our YouTube page with many things that's still on there. There's lots of webinars, vlogs, blogs, whatever you want to call them in the world of the internet. I'm not very up on all of that, but there is an awful lot out there. Reading, great articles if somebody subscribes to Nursery World, or you do as a setting. There is so much out there to support practitioners' knowledge of how to support progression in communication and language. And one thing we really, really need to be really important and aware of. And it's very insightful. This quote in the yellow bubble from ICANN: by the age of 5, a child's vocab is a strong predictor of their educational success and outcomes at the age of 30. And this, communication language is that golden thread throughout the whole of the revised EYFS. And it's in every area of learning, isn't it? So important. And what we need to remember is that, that strong vocabulary for children will support their lifelong journey, help them to engage in learning and support their mental well-being as well. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on throughout the session this evening. So on the next slide, we've just got some sources of support there for you.
Jo, we just had a question in as well.
Sorry,
Tessa, who said about ECAT not being relevant now, and will there be a new one coming out?
They're not going. I'm pretty sure they are not going to produce a new one. Now I have this question again. I'm sorry, but my mind's gone a bit blank. I can't think. I did have this question from a couple of settings. I will double check for you, Tessa, and find out. I don't think there is going to be a new one, but you can still use. It's not. You can still use the stages because it's not a statutory document. You can still use them as guidance. Not every document has changed specifically to meet the development matters stages, for example, because the development matters again is guidance. So, but I will look into that for you, Tessa. Okay, I will.
And just to reaffirm what Jo's saying as well, so the only statutory element of curriculum that the EYFS puts into place is that educational programme that I showed you a minute ago. That there's so many more aspects of ECAT in terms of splitting language into its component parts, language and communication and understanding into its component parts. So I really do think it's very relevant still, and very helpful and useful. But absolutely, we'll take that away and ask.
Yeah. So yeah, on the next slide, just a quick look at those sources of support. You've got ECAT, again, University Speaking is a fantastic document and really useful actually to use with parents. You've got the Education Endowment Foundation, Preparing for Literacy. I would highly recommend taking a look at that. And there's a really fantastic poster that summarises all of the key areas to support your provision across, all types of provision, just really thought-provoking key points. And there's that poster as well. You can see the ages and stages there: listening and attention, understanding, speech, sounds and talk, and social skills. So another great document for professionals and actually to use with for reassurance with parents as well, because we all have them coming to us and asking, my child's not saying this and this, and that can often be reassuring for them. So the next slide is just I'll just give you a second. You can obviously, while I'm talking, just have a look at this quote, and about, again, reinforcing that emphasis on that language is the foundation of education. And a couple of key things I picked out there. It does say that there is no quick fix, to make sure that every child has the best experience ever. But there is robust evidence that interventions which target oral language skills give that opportunity and have significant potential for improving those educational outcomes. This is why we need to be so hot on our communication and language provision in our settings. I'm sure some of you have listened to Julie Fisher or are aware of Professor Julie Fisher, and one of the things she says, she's got she calls it the 3 T's. She says it's about giving children time to talk and for us to tune in and talk as well. She's got a lot of great information on it. If you want to know more, get in touch with me and I'll signpost you to her book. And I'm not on commission or anything, but just I've got a few articles and things I could share with you as well. So still a little bit on the communication and language area here, because it is such a key thing. I'm sure some of you have heard of the Word Gap Matters report that came out quite a few years ago now. I believe it's 2018, because I talk about this in the letters and sounds training. And you can see from the percentages here, that self-esteem, behaviour and a child's ability to make friends were all felt to be negatively affected by low levels of vocabulary. And this is what this report evidenced. The evidence is there, clear clear as day. You know, it's the proportion of teachers surveyed believe that the word gap was impacting on pupils in the following ways. And since this report was out in 2020, there was an Oxford Language they did another report called Bridging the Word Gap at Transition, and that was looking at primary and secondary school children, and looking a little bit at the impact of COVID as well. And it was very, very similar percentages again, you know, talking about how because they were affected by the word gap, they had low self-esteem. Exactly what it says here in the list. It was still the same. You know, we're talking sort of 5-6 years on from this, and considering COVID. So we need to think about that lower self-esteem. Are we, you know, giving them those quality experiences and that quality language and communication to, you know, feel valued, to boost their confidence? We need to foster that love of learning and making it fun, and that will hopefully impact later on life's chances positively. You know, that negative behaviour, having the words to explain how they feel, you know, that emotional language is so important, that language to be able to self-regulate and consider how they're feeling and behaving. If a child has difficulty in communicating, the socialisation is not going to be as great, and difficulty in communicating, so linking up with their peers and possibly being able to express their ideas. And then again, you know, that school attendance. I know nursery is not, you know, early years is not compulsory, but it, you know, if that child's in that cycle already of, oh, it's wet outside, I'm not going to get up and take them to nursery today, I can't be bothered, you know, and we all know of families who, you know, if they're already in that cycle, then that habit is going to be formed for later in life. So things to consider there. So the second prime area we're going to have a quick think about is that personal, social and emotional development. Again, the summary on the screen here is from the educational programmes, and this is what we need to do to you know, for children to make progress in this area. We need to be ensuring they're going to lead healthy and happy lives, and everything is fundamental to their cognitive development and so on. I'm not going to read all of that to you because you can see it there. So what do staff need to know to support progress in this area? And please contribute if you would like to in the chat when I'm asking these questions. So first of all, they need to know about those stages of social behaviour and play to be able to support children's interactions appropriately at the stage they are. They need to consider factors which may impact on child's PSED. We've already talked about, you know, the child who may be in that cycle of a parent who doesn't bring them regularly to the setting, etc. You know, or for example, were they, you know, a premature baby, and so that's had impact on their later skills. You know, do they suffer from a long time illness? Is there poverty in the family, a poor maternal bond, parents' mental health issues? You know, I could list and probably go talk and talk and talk. The list goes on. So it's about considering all of these factors which may impact on that child. And again, that word knowing comes in here, doesn't it? From day one, creating those positive partnerships with the parents, you know, respectfully, you know, engaging with them and not judging them, but supporting them as well. The characteristics of effective teaching and learning, so important, so important. And you know, point 4 on the slide there talks about you know, developing that positive sense of self, setting themselves goals, you know, having confidence in their own abilities, persisting in their choice of play. All of these things are in those that active learning, that creating and thinking critically, and that, you know, all of those aspects of the characteristics. So does your practice support the development of those? And signs of poor emotional well-being. We all know that, you know, through the last 18 months, we're coming up to, let's hope we're not, well, we probably will still get to 2 years with COVID around. And I think it's with us now, and something we're going to have to manage, you know, in a roller coaster sort of way. But it's definitely, we need to think about, are children demonstrating, you know, that short attention span? Are they possibly withdrawn and responsive? Is their behaviour slightly aggressive? Because they feel, you know, they have poor emotional well-being? And does delayed speech or poor communication and language skills, thinking about all of these things, but obviously we need to be aware that those things I've commented on there could be indicators of other issues. So, you know, be very, very aware of that and make up that picture of the child with your observations and knowing the child and the family. So how do you support this? Again, it can be through training, coaching, mentoring, all of those things I said, reading resources, attending training, bite-sized training, posters, etc. And something I've used before in provision when I was a manager is the Leuven scales of well-being. I've never known if I've said that right, his name, Leuven, never known. Now we have a learning environment audit that we're going to discuss and pop into this conversation throughout the session, and the Leuven scale of well-being is included in that learning environment audit, which we can signpost you to on our website. And that is a form of assessment, and it allows you to measure a child's emotional well-being from 1 to 5, and it has clear descriptors. And so, you know, if you are concerned about some specific children, or you're just looking across the board, particularly in our current climate, it may be a useful tool for you to use. So something there to support you to make sure you're acknowledging where they are and supporting them to make progression in this area. And then finally, we're going to look at the final prime area of physical development again. Here we've got that summary on the slide of the educational programmes, those key areas, and Alison's already touched on the huge importance of that journey from gross motor skills to fine motor skills. And again, it's here thinking about what do staff need to know to support the progress in this area. And we're going to be linking all of these, by the way, to pedagogy later in this section. We need to be thinking about those stages of gross and fine motor. You know, we can't expect them to hold the pencil before they can, as I say when I'm doing my regular into writing training, until they can control all of this and I shake my arms and legs around everywhere. We need to think about those factors which impact on physical development. That might be the growth of the child, genetic conditions, you know, muscle tone, the environment they have access to, and those opportunities also for physical play. I attended a meeting yesterday, and we were all talking about the NHS guidelines are actually for a baby 30 minutes a day of good tummy time, and for 1 to 5 year olds it's actually 3 hours a day of physical activity. And that doesn't mean full PE sessions or anything like that. That can be walking, trips to the park, you know, a ride on the bike down to the local shop with mummy or daddy. But it's just 3 hours is quite a large proportion, and I think, you know, a few people on the meeting were like, gosh, that much. And I think they possibly were parents to 3-year-olds and thinking, oh dear, I better get out and about. But no, it's just, yeah, it's just something to consider, actually looking at those guidelines. And I know on the NHS, because I double checked it earlier today, they do have posters and things that you can you could use in the setting to help with parents. So we need to think about skills progression in this area. We're going to talk about that in a moment. You know, with scissor control, we can't just expect children to sit down and use scissors effectively straight away, holding a pencil as well. And we'll have a look at that in a moment. And then that nutrition, the importance of keeping healthy. Are you promoting that within your setting? You know, what's happening when the children are not with you, where they're offered healthy snacks, a healthy lunch. You know, we've all gasped sometimes when we've opened a child's lunchbox, haven't we, when they're bringing it in themselves. So are we promoting it, that eating healthy, exercising to support a healthy body? And alongside all of that, obviously, in the new statutory guidance, you know, promoting that good oral health as well. And we can support all of these things. Repetition, I apologise. Training, coaching, mentoring, all of those different types of training we talked about. So the next slide, and hopefully this is going to work. This is a really fantastic short few minutes video now for you to watch about fine motor skills, and the link is at the bottom there as well. And I would highly recommend this website for across all areas of learning. So we'll just take a few minutes to watch this.
Fine motor skills involve the small muscles of the body that enable movement of the fingers, feet and toes and face, including the mouth and eyes. Develop fine motor control to gain coordination between these muscles. For example, coordination. Fine motor skills are a part of whole body physicality. They empower children to navigate the world with confidence and independence. It's important that we understand fine motor control and fine motor skills don't happen separately to the rest of physicality, so they are actually very dependent on gross motor development as well, for example. And in terms of thinking about children and their whole body development, how do you promote that in your practice?
I just think about what I see children do at the centre every day, whether it's getting the fire ready and kind of chopping up food and putting on the fire to cook, or whether they're gardening and sort of digging down or troweling down into the soil and taking out the seeds, or taking out the plug of the plant and planting that. They don't separate out their bodies when they're doing it. It actually is all happening at the same time.
I think it's really interesting actually to think about physical development being as that holistic approach to learning and development. So not looking into solely about fine and gross, because they are so intertwined, but also with the rest of all of their learning and development. You know, physical development is a real gateway to learning and development in all areas of child development. Beyond the early years foundation stage, you know, it's really thinking about actually that their brain is passing on messages to their body, and the relation and, you know, relationship between those two will then give children the opportunity to seek what they desire.
So let's have a think about purposeful tasks and play.
I think one of the key things for us at our settings is making time in our routines to allow the day-to-day activities like putting on coats and doing up zips and doing our own shoes and getting our waterproofs on a rainy day have a huge impact on making every task purposeful. So we're creating learning opportunities and allowing learning opportunities within what could be seen as quite mundane tasks. Meal times, for example, we make sure that children have access to self-service.
I'm also thinking about those everyday experiences in our provision, like, you know, malleable stuff and foam and clay, and the idea that children come to that using those fine motor skills of pinching and stretching and rolling and pulling, and they will naturally provide those playful experiences, will naturally provide children opportunities to develop those fine motor skills.
Let's talk a little bit about how we encourage independence.
Yeah, so I think the environment provides, and it's the adult's role to model and support and scaffold learning. So a really good example about that is having scissors out in the environment, but supporting children how to use them safely, but also differentiating that for some children who might take longer to be confident in using them, and having spring-loaded scissors or double-handed scissors, and giving children lots of opportunity to kind of use them on different materials.
I think that differentiation is a really interesting thought, actually, especially if we're thinking about differentiated early years outcomes for children with special educational needs and disabilities, that really gives us an opportunity to look at those really tiny steps of learning and development and be able to celebrate and achieve those.
Fine motor skills are a part of whole body physicality and depend upon well-developed gross motor skills, core strength and coordination. Having good fine motor control empowers the child, promotes confidence and independence.
All play is a purposeful task for children. The environment we create, full of tape, glue, scissors, provides them with a rich opportunity to develop fine motor skills.
Loving, trustful relationships between adults and children allow for independence to grow naturally within the play environment.
Thank you for that. Well, I hope you found that useful. It's just an interesting summary of, you know, the importance of fine motor skills. And obviously they talked about progression within that, which actually leads very nicely onto the final slide in this section about supporting progression. You know, the guy spoke there about different types of scissors, didn't he? The spring-loaded ones there, which you can see in this progression document, you know, and considering that differentiation, which I'm sure we all do, but really interesting. And please visit that website, you know, the help for early years providers, because there's lots and lots of really useful videos on there just to refresh our thoughts on what our provision is. So here we're talking now, we're going to consider just quickly about physical development, and here is continue with that, and here is an example of a skills progression document for using scissors, you know. And as you can see through that skills progression document, this was written by a guest reception teacher from she's early years phase leader at an infant school, and she was a guest blog on Julian Grenier's blog, by the way, and the link is there if you would like to see more. And she like what she says in her quote in the box on the side, they decided to hold off on their curriculum progression writing and focus on sorry, something's just come across the screen, I can't read it, and focus on skill progression. And so they broke down each area of learning into specific skills, and and they may not progress from linearly, sorry, struggle with that word, but every child will have gaps to fill to support their forward progression. So it's having this guidance here to see what they need to do and what they and how they're going to get to those next stages in their learning. And I'm sure if many of you joined us for our EYFS reforms introduction to right way back, gosh, seems like a distant memory now, you will recall Julian Grenier's skills progression documents and the bread roll example that we use. And if you would like to see more of those, they are still on our EYFS 2021 webpage with that you can go and have a look at. But we need to think about not just obviously about physical development, which is very important, but we need to think, what other skill progression sheets may support staff in your setting. I don't know if any of you use them already, or if any of you have thought about using them or seen good examples. I recently visited a setting, virtually visited a setting, and they have developed their own skills progression documents, and one of those is a little bit similar to the bread roll scenario, but it's about really meeting the cohort that in their setting. This is very setting specific, like Alison said right back at the start. One of their key objectives, curriculum goals, is to follow a recipe to make Play-Doh or a biscuit. Now, very, very, very simple end goal, but all of those key skills, and they've listed, so that's their intent, and then to implement it, they've considered how they're going to do that through their environment provision and what the adults are going to do as well. And then they're considering the impact. So in order for children to achieve the desired outcome, and I'll just read a couple of the things to you. For example, children will explore initially with mixing and different tools in sand play, mixing their own paint, making mud pies. They'll scoop, they'll count the scoops, they'll spread and flatten. So you can see those skills already beginning to that, achieving that end goal of making Play-Doh or a biscuit. Then they'll follow recipe cards with an adult, etc. And it's consequential, isn't it? You can see that progression. If you haven't developed these in your setting, it might be worth considering thinking about it. And like Alison said, possibly think about something that is relatively fixed initially. For example, maths. And I went on the NCETM, the National Centre for Excellence in Teaching of Mathematics website earlier today, and had a look at they have typical progressions of key ideas in specific concepts. So for example, in maths, they've got some information there about counting. So the first step there before we can move on with children is to say number words in sequence to 5 and then obviously to 10. And then they've got some ideas, and obviously you're immediately yourselves as skilled practitioners probably thinking, well, we could do this, this and this, number rhymes. There we go. That supports that first stage. And then number 2, moving on to the next stage in that of progression, would be tagging each object with one number word. So, talking to them, how many children are playing in the sand? How many cars have you got in the garage? That sort of work with the child in their play. And then number 3 is knowing the last number counted gives the total so far. So, for example, there's many games out there where you might roll the dice, 3 dots. They need to pick up 3 pieces of, I can't think of anything, 3 pieces of rubbish from the rubbish bin, not a real one, but if they're playing a game with those sorts of things. So really, really interesting. And when I come off talking in a minute, I will put that link in the chat for you, because it's all, you know, regarding maths progression, it's all laid out there for you. But have a look at the examples we have on our website as well, and consider that skill progression, that differentiation. You know, where are the children going to start? Where do you want them to get to, and how are you going to take them there? And using a progression document such as this can not just help the child, but can also help the practitioners to take them on that journey effectively, and with the aim so that they do make that progress. And that's something that Ofsted will, you know, have that discussion with you. You know, okay, so you're doing this, for example, mix it, you know, encouraging them to make their own Play-Doh. Why are you doing it? You know, and does that meet, is it bespoke to your cohort as well? Definitely something you need to consider. And back to that word, knowing your children. So now I'm going to hand back to Alison. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks so much, Jo. Yeah, so many of those messages, you know, are so pertinent, aren't they? So important, and they're nothing new, really. I think that's what we wanted to get across in our training, wasn't it? When the, you know, the reforms first came into play, you know, you'll recognise and be doing so many of the things that Jo has talked about over the last few slides. And really, the content of what Jo has delivered is all about the intent. It's what we want children to learn. It's the aims, where we're trying to get to, etc. And Jo's just popped the NCETM link in there. Really do recommend looking at it. There is also on there, just for your understanding and just for your information, really, number blocks, a series of lesson plans for number blocks. So although, you know, historically we've never wanted to kind of watch videos with our children in setting, this is the one time we're allowed to. And actually, there's so many lesson plans that go alongside it, and then showing that progression of skills. Those videos, those episodes from series 1, 2, and 3, for example, are all progressive. They all show progression of skills, so they can be used to support your maths curriculum planning. So that was all about the intent. What we need to focus on now is the implementation of how we're going to do it. You know, we've all kind of been through some kind of training, whether it's up to degree level or level 3, or whatever it is that you've been through in terms of training, maybe QTS. But pedagogy is a massive part of teaching. It is teaching, really. It encompasses everything that we do to support children. And what I'd really like you to realise over the next few slides is actually in the foundation stage, in the early years, we do so much more of it than any other stage of a child's education. And that's really sad, because actually all of the things that we're going to talk about in the next few slides that help children to progress are just, well, they're endless. It just shows what fantastic jobs everybody does and how we do it. And we do stand on the shoulder of giants. That quote there in yellow, there's people who have spent years, even lifetimes, researching, evidencing, philosophizing about what supports children to learn and develop well. As we develop the pedagogy of our settings, it's important to remember that you may dip into many approaches which either complement or enhance one another. And the list over there, you know, there are many, many more, but we just wanted to pick out some of them. Some of them you'll be more familiar with than others. Montessori, we have, you know, specific Montessori settings in Somerset, and there are others across the country. Reggio Emilia, the theorists and still practice and provision is embedded in that way in Italy. And many of our leaders in education and many of you may have had the opportunity to go and actually have a look at provision and practice over there. Many of the stuff you'll see on enabling environments comes from Reggio. So many of those things are rooted in that approach. You know, forest schools becoming more and more popular for very good reason. You know, giving children access to the outdoors, showing them learning through very natural play, using the outdoors as your learning environment. And then obviously you can see the rest of them. Bruna Vygotsky, that zone of proximal development you may have heard of, and Jo referred to challenging some children. Ultimately, we need to challenge all children, no matter what age and stage of development they are, but using that zone of proximal development and just taking them outside of their comfort zone. All of that theory came and was rooted in Vygotsky's research. So if you haven't had an opportunity to have a look at these, or you feel there are members of your team that might benefit from looking at some of these other theorists and what they have produced as a result, then take the time to look at one or two. You don't need to go into masses of detail. Just a highlight of kind of what their main outcomes and findings were is really, really helpful. As I said, it's not an exhaustive list. I'm sure you can add many, many more, but none of these are new. Okay, the curiosity approach, for example, is one of the latest ones, but this is based on theories already out there. Curiosity, having those wondrous objects in your environment, you know, making your environment really enticing, things that children can't help but go and look at and touch and talk about and ask questions about, you know, having those provocations in your environment, just a really great part of that curiosity approach, and you know, encouraging children to be wondrous about their environments and what you're putting into their provision in setting and at home. So basically, what is pedagogy? Well, it's helping children to learn. It's all of those variety of ways that we use. And children are at the most powerful stage of learning when they're in the early years. Brain development is happening at such a rapid rate. You know I say it and it sounds a bit touchy-feely, but you know, we're so privileged, aren't we, to have any kind of impact on a child when they're going through that rate of development. You know, we really are having an impact on what they're learning and how they're learning it. And every child can make progress in their learning with the right help. Again, talking about that scaffolding, that word is you know, is ever more kind of on our lips now, and it's about scaffolding up. It's helping children to access things that we have in our environment, helping children to access our provision, helping children to access our progression of learning, not differentiating down. Differentiation is still important, but it's about flipping that on its head, making it a positive. How are we going to support those children? What things are we going to put into place to make sure that every child has access to the things that we are providing for them? An effective pedagogy, just like the list of theorists that we just saw on the previous slide, is a mix of all types of different approaches. Children do learn from play, and I hope long gone are the times when people said, oh, children just play in early years. There's a good reason for that, because it is absolutely so powerful. Children are operating at the highest cognitive rate when they're at play, when they're fully engrossed in play, when the Leuven or Leuven scales, whatever they are, Joe, I don't know it either, but when they're properly engaged with an activity, when you can see it on their face that they can't be distracted, that the process that's happening in their brain, it would blow your minds. So yeah, and that ultimately a lot of what happens then and how a child interacts and plays comes from what we model to them ourselves. So again, going back to people like Greg Bottrell that you've heard at some of our conferences and certainly heard us talk about, it's being playful, it's going down to our own childlike level, really being playful with children and modeling how they can access our resources and ultimately how they're learning. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. That word involve, you know, there's so many aspects to that, aren't there, in terms of what we do in our settings. So let's have a think now, and I really love the fact that Nikki's included this. I always include this in our moderation training for our reception teachers, because in that this is a footnote, unfortunately, but it is still there, so we're holding on to it. Ofsted's definition of teaching includes interactions with children during planned and child-initiated play and activities, and this is just a small selection of the masses of ways, even though it's a footnote, it's a big one, of what we do, our pedagogical approaches, what we do to teach children and the different ways we do that. And it may be any of these or all of these or a variety of these at any time. Communication and modelling language. We talked about that earlier, didn't we? Making sure that within your curriculum plans, you've talked together about the language that you really want children to learn. You may have pinpointed a child that's missing some aspect of that language. So you're going to make sure that you have every opportunity to include that missing bits of the piece into that week's planning or into the day for that child. We're showing children what to do. That might be showing directly, it may be parallel play and just showing them in terms of us kind of taking what they're doing and taking it to the next level. It's explaining to them. And again, that can be done, you know, by actually talking to them or showing them. So both can be intertwined there. We're demonstrating, we're exploring new ideas, we're encouraging, we're definitely questioning, not too many questions. We referred before to Julie Fisher, and she absolutely says we've got to think about how many questions we ask. It's more about commenting and then throwing in the odd question here and then rather than putting too many into place. We're recalling things that happened before. Do you remember when? You know, we do that all the time, don't we? But it's such a great way of teaching children and helping them to be memorable about something. Providing a narrative for what they're doing, that's a big one, isn't it? It's basically telling them what they're doing. We sound a bit silly sometimes when you first do it and you're not used to it, but it's so powerful in terms of children understanding what they're doing, and in their own way, that's metacognition. It's knowing about knowing, it's learning about learning. We're facilitating for them, and we're setting challenges, appropriate challenges, knowing the children, setting the challenges that are appropriate to them. And it does take account of not only what we do as adults, but it's the equipment that we provide. It's the physical environment and the structure and routines of the day that establishes expectations. And again, modelling is a massive thing that comes in there. In there, you know, if we want to put these beautiful, curious objects out, we want children to treat them nicely. We want them to be there for a long time. So we've got to model that and our expectations for how we use or they use the environment. Some people, I've seen it done really, really well. They might have a photograph in each area of how it looks when it's tidy, when it's tidied away, and that shows children instantly what we're expecting of them when we say tidy up, and we put the tidy up song on, or we do what we do in our routines. So all of those things are taking account of what we're doing on a daily basis to support progression of learning for our children. So let's think specifically of some of the areas now. And again, we are focusing on the prime areas of learning today. Clearly, there's more areas, but hopefully what we're doing is giving you an example of how to look in more detail in a kind of a 360-degree approach to each area of learning in terms of your intent, implementation and impact, and therefore progression of skills and knowledge that you need. So let's think about communication and language, what we are doing, the pedagogy we're using to support that. So it is about children's back and forth interactions, the quality of the conversations. You remember now in the educational programme, these are all featured there. Language-rich environment. I think we have to stop ourselves sometimes to think, what is a language-rich environment? I'm sure many of you know. I don't know whether you want to put anything in the chat while we're talking, but what do you think is a language-rich environment? We say it an awful lot, but I'd just be interested to hear what you think. By commenting on and echoing back what they say. Interactions, what does Julia Fisher call it? Interacting, not interfering. That's right. Sorry, Joe. So actually commenting on at the appropriate time, echoing back what they say, adding new vocabulary. But when a child is engrossed in a play activity, that's probably not the time to go and do that. We let them and we'll just listen in to the conversation, the language they're using. At another time, it would be appropriate to do all of those things. Reading frequently to children, just giving them a really language-rich environment in terms of stories and books and imagination and characters and narrative and non-fiction and fiction. The more we do that, the more children will really want to be absorbed in books, and the more they're learning ultimately. We therefore engage them with those stories, and we engage them actively. We don't just sit, hold the book and read to them. If you're ever coming across aspects of your provision where you think, oh, I think we just need to remind ourselves what a good storytelling session looks like, then go on and look at some of Neil Griffith's stuff, for example. That could just be a really short aspect of a team meeting, just to encourage people to be really creative and imaginative, to use props and resources and story stacks and really engage the children in that storytelling process. And like I said, using non-fiction as well as rhymes and poems are all featured in that educational programme. And then through our conversations with children, storytelling and role play, we are modelling them, from their teacher. They want you to show them how to access things. It helps them to do it better. It helps them to do it more imaginatively. It helps them to take their next steps. And ultimately, that's really great for them. It suddenly opens up a whole world of opportunities for them they never knew existed. All the time, sensitively asking them questions that invite them to elaborate and tell us what they know. So when you are implementing these things, there's also a bit of assessment going on there as well. So how do you know this is happening? How do you monitor this? Again, some reflective questions for you and your teams, or for childminders and your childminding groups. Do you ever stand back and actually see some of these things in place? Are peer observations going on in your settings? Are you recording interactions? That can be a tricky one. Never like seeing myself on video, but it tells you so much. And actually, you might think, okay, that would have been an opportunity to sensitively question at that point, or that wasn't the opportunity to question. Let's think about something else we could do next time in a better way. So we're going to look at another video now. So these are available on the the government website. We shared these a while ago, and I think you've put them back in, haven't you, Joe? Some of the links to the gov.uk resources and videos. So all of this has been put out to support the implementation of the EYFS 2021. And this particular video is exploring language. This particular lady's used in some of the videos, or quite a few of the videos rather. She's obviously very experienced in terms of her setting, lots of experience over the years. And it's about accessing, so access to resources, activity ideas and advice for teaching communication and language in the early years. And those resources are split down into 3 areas based on the educational programmes. And again, going back to that ECAT question, splitting it into its component parts, how are we helping children to interact, to explore language, to listen and understand, that social communication as well. There's varying, aspects of that we need to firstly understand and know how to support. Okay, so let's pop this one on.
Language development in the first years of life is critical to later educational success. Language skills are time sensitive, which means that they're really difficult to acquire later on. As practitioners, we're in a position to make a big difference at this crucial stage by providing a rich language environment and by being attentive conversation partners. Language development is best supported in a playful environment full of stories and songs, rhymes, signs, talk and imaginative play. So one of the things we're going to talk about is actually just trying to find time to talk with children in everyday experiences and routines. I'm just wondering whether you've got some examples that we could explore around that.
When I was working with in the 2-year-old room, I think one of the things we've been really thinking about and reflecting on is ensuring that the routine has a pace but isn't so quick that the children are rushed through it, because during those daily routines and those everyday activities are a really good opportunity for them to explore and talk, and us to talk together with them, and they're really able to make connections with their home routines.
I think it's really important for children to have real reasons to talk and have lots of opportunities for spontaneous conversations, but also perhaps more structured times with adults to support their communication and language. Have you got any examples that you use in your setting?
When we finish the first bit of the morning, we come back and sit down in small groups, which is we call review time, and the children they talk about what they have been learning in that morning, and they share with their peers as well, and they ask what they've been and what they like and what they were doing and who were they playing, which is very important for children who doesn't want to talk that a lot, and they share experience as well.
I think that really predictable routine of review time, because it happens every day, it gives confidence for those children who might not initially be able to express themselves verbally. And we use lots of visual prompts to support the children, photographs of what they've been doing that morning. It might be real things that they bring, a model that they've made, and they're the experts because they're the ones who've been doing that learning in the morning, and it really supports those children who may feel a little bit more shy in a group, or just might not yet have the vocabulary, or they might be learning it in a new language from their home language.
A really great way of introducing children to new words and vocabulary is using really great books and songs and rhymes. Do you have any experience of using great things in your nursery school?
We use songs and stories really regularly with the children as we do all the way through the nursery. That repetition really supports the children to consolidate their learning and gives them that sense of understanding and feeling part of the group. With the 2-year-olds particularly, lots of the action rhymes and nursery rhymes, which have actions that go with them that you can use your whole body to explore, really support children to sort of understand the different parts of the word, and to really tune into the sounds within the words, as well as that sense of joy of using your voice to express yourself and using your whole body to express yourself.
The best thing of all is enjoying conversations with children and encouraging children to talk to each other. If a child knows you like talking and listening to them, they will want to talk and listening to you.
Children will learn so much language in their earliest years, and this unlocks new learning in all areas of their life. Exploring language with young learners is so important, and as practitioners we're in a very powerful position to make a big difference by providing a rich language environment. Play is often the best way for children to use and explore the words that they're learning in meaningful contexts.
And we've used, as I said, some of those videos in previous training sessions. So, would encourage you to take a look at those. Got some really great ideas on them and prompts for discussion, etc. Okay, so let's think about pedagogy now and how we're teaching PSED. As I said, we're looking at all of these ways in the prime areas. So what are we doing to support children's PSED, their well-being, their mental health well-being, all of those different aspects that we know we need to do to support them? And it does start with strong, warm and supportive relationships with adults. I think it's more important to flip that on its head and think, if that wasn't in place, what impact that would have on children. If they came thinking that actually people didn't like them, or the adults in the room didn't like them, they were a bit cold, they weren't supportive at all, in fact they were really dismissive. You imagine the impact on the child and what the child therefore could learn, if anything. It's going back to meeting those basic needs. If those basic needs aren't met, children can't possibly learn, and they certainly won't be motivated to do so. So those strong, warm and supportive relationships are so crucial for those children to feel accepted and welcomed, and therefore wanting and willing to play and to explore. We do need to be supporting children to manage their emotions, and I'm sure I've got Sarah Love, a little person sat on my shoulder here, wanting to prompt me to remind everybody that all emotions are okay. It's out there now for you to access. It's fully funded and training there. So that's just another aspect of what you could do to support yourselves in terms of managing emotions. So many great ideas, including the hand model, knowing why children react in certain ways and what we can do to support them. And ultimately, it's down to adult modelling and guidance, isn't it? It's us showing them with our experience. We've been through that. We've done our learning now, or most of it, and we want to show them actually how they can manage their emotions. And there's such masses of different ways how we can do that and support them. And they will love to hear from you about experiences that you've had and how you managed it. And it's amazing what impact that will have on them. They will learn to look after their bodies. Yeah, again, lots of modelling and modelling ways that we can support that and talk to them about our own experiences. And that might include healthy eating. Meal times are an obvious time to talk about that, but equally kind of like discussing with them what they might have had for breakfast this morning, or telling them what you had. The starting those conversations, that sustained shared thinking, you might be able to take that conversation forward. You're not only supporting that aspect of PSED, but you're also doing communication language at the same time. And how to manage personal needs independently. And again, a lot of us in our settings, even in reception class to a degree, we are still on that journey of making sure that children can manage their own personal needs and become independent in many ways. Just like Jenny, your example of children dressing themselves, we're still on that journey. We still want to crack that. So yeah, absolutely, that's something that we can do. We can model, we can guide, and ultimately we can allow children time to do that for themselves. And then through supported interaction with other children, they learn how to make good friendships, cooperate and resolve conflicts peaceably. And I've just started to think about kind of the progression and the skills that you need, or children need, to be able to do that. Starting to think about good friendships, starts from two children getting together, doesn't it? Then it starts to bring in more children and negotiating, problem solving. I'm just thinking about those games that we play. That's a really good example of how we're teaching them and how we're modeling them to take turns, to wait, to anticipate, but not to jump in and take over. All those key skills where they will then use in their everyday lives and in their play, and ultimately will lead to the kind of friends that they will want to be to their peers. Cooperation is definitely part of that as well. Game playing is such a powerful way of demonstrating that and modelling to children what we expect from them, the expectations of that. And resolving conflicts, you know, talking through problems, asking, you know, again, going back to managing emotions, how they feel, how that made me feel when that happened, you know, taking it the personal away. When that happened, I felt, you know, that's a really powerful way again of just modeling how you can take the heat out of a situation and help them to work through their emotions and how to resolve their you know, disputes. And again, it's really interesting questions for you to think about what strategies that you use in settings to support all of those statements above. You know, there might be some examples in the day, especially if you've had a day, you come to the end and you think, goodness me, you know, the children were absolutely wild today. There were so many kind of like little conflicts going on all over the place. And actually thinking back about, maybe that was just a day where we weren't on it in terms of supporting the children. Maybe there was another reason, but reflecting on that as a team, kind of trying to pinpoint those moments where we could have done something differently, which might have had an impact on the whole rest of the day, is just you know, a helpful and sometimes insightful process to go through. So these are all the things that we can do to support children, all the things that they should be doing and what we can do to support them. So creating opportunities for them to have sensory exploration. I know many settings now in their mud kitchens, for example, have herbs and maybe some spices and things like that. So just to, you know, using all their senses in terms of that very basic part of our continuous provision, and supporting children to access them and creative ways of using them in their, you know, in their mud pies, etc. Tummy time, crawling and play. Joe's already mentioned this. Obviously, half an hour for babies should be spent on their tummies. We know that that doesn't happen. So, you know, us being able to model that again, especially to parents as well. And that will help those babies to progress in their physical development and be able to lift their heads up, strengthen their necks, strengthen all of those muscles that will lead to those gross motor and finally those fine motor skills. Creating games, providing opportunities for play, both indoors and out. You know, children can do that themselves, and often we will lead from their examples, but then we might need to give some examples as well and be creative and be playful and suggest different ways that they could do that. Obviously, those opportunities for gross and fine motor skills, we've focused on that a lot. Repeated and varied opportunities to explore and play with small world activities, puzzles, arts and craft. Now in that I can see maths, it really highlights maths to me. And when we're thinking about maths mastery, you know, now we want to do a lot more on subitizing. We want to really get to grips of what the number 2 is in many different ways. That reminds me of that. So you repeat, you give varied opportunities, lots of different ways to learn the same thing again and again. That gives you the depth of understanding and will help the children then to move on to the next more complex task. And these are all the things we do. We create environments, we put resources in there. We create the space, you know, we manage the space, we encourage, we also have a go when we show them how they could use it. We're facilitating games, all of those things there. We do it all the time, but just be, you know, really proud of yourselves because it's a tough job, you know, much tougher than, you know, later phases of education. That's probably why we're just so successful in the early years in being able to really move children's learning and progress forward at such a rapid rate. So in terms of reflective considerations, again, lots of ideas for you to take away, but, you know, are staff confident in using a range of those pedagogical approaches? You know, maybe take time to identify them. Maybe some of your team don't know that's what they're doing, you know, many elements of what they're doing and supporting children with each day. They're maybe not aware that that is a pedagogical approach. So point it out, you know, celebrate that, help them to make a list, for example, and talk about it. And that will lead to, you know, much more confident staff knowing that they're making a difference. How do practitioners check their choices, approaches, work for the children to support their learning? Again, that's quite a lot about assessment, isn't it? If you're thinking about maybe something you've planned in, one of your sequences of learning, you know, the progression and the knowledge of the skills. Maybe if the children aren't actually getting what you intended from that, you know, are you going back and checking? Are you thinking about alternative ways to do that? And all of those other things, including how children learn. Perhaps there's a particular schema or one of their characteristics of effective teaching and learning that we need to support. Okay. Let's move forward. So going back to the Ofsted definition of teaching, so we've obviously gone through all of those pedagogical approaches, all of those things that we do, and we are teachers. I must remind us all of that. But at the bottom, we wanted to just highlight here the equipment adults provide, the physical environment, the structure and the routines of the day that establishes expectations. And this is a good time to hand over to Jo, who's going to talk all about enabling environments.
Thank you, Alison. Yeah, so we're obviously now going to consider those other 3 points on this slide here. First of all, we're going to, we need to consider how, moving on, we're linking that pedagogy to the environment on the next slide. Thank you. So the environment we have, that's your indoor, your outdoor, your emotional environment, your social environment, all lead to that enabling environment to hopefully encourage and support children to make progress in their learning across all areas. But obviously we're thinking primarily about the prime areas here this evening. The environment, as it says in the orange bubble here, the environment plays that key role in supporting and extending children's development and learning across all aspects. And we need to be thinking, about what both Bruna and Vygotsky, they emphasise that child's environment, especially the social environment, is so, so crucial. And they both agreed. And I have to say I'm with them on this as well. You could have put Bruna, Vygotsky and Sawyer perhaps here, both agree that adults should play an active role in assisting the child's learning. Definitely, I often say in some of the other training I've delivered, we are one of the best resources in the environment that a child could have if we support them sensitively in their progression. But thinking about the emotional environment there, we need to think that it's more than just that physical space, because it contains the emotions of the children who spend time in it, the staff that work there, and the parents who leave their children there. That emotional environment, it's an invisible measure of feelings, isn't it? And sometimes settings, they can have that feel good factor where the children, staff and parents feel positive, and at others it may not have quite such a good feeling about it, when possibly children, staff or parent are feeling, there might be days when people are feeling generally sort of not quite themselves. Recently we've been going through an awful lot with COVID. Settings have been impacted personally, practitioners, and professionally, managing all of these different systems of control, etc. So there was bound to be days when things have not quite been on the upbeat where we would all be. But also it's not just about that day to day, it's thinking about, is there that feel good factor, 99.9% of the time in your setting? I'm sure, we talk as a team, we visit many settings, not so many at the moment, but when we do, we can sense when we go into a setting. And I've seen a huge progression in some settings where things, that feel good factor has not been there. And you can walk in and the children are not engaged. There's no purpose in what they're doing. They basically particularly aren't very happy. The staff, everything is quite negative about what is happening. I've heard comments like, no, don't do that, you need to put that back there. No, we're not doing that now. When a child has seen something that has sparked and ignited their enthusiasm, and immediately it's, as Greg Bottrell would say, has been steamrolled over by that adult. So it's thinking about, are we enabling this positive emotional environment for our children? And Greg Bottrell at the bottom there, Nikki put this quote in, they will be operating within the room in the play that I have created for them. And Greg calls it a learning landscape. And I really like that sort of terminology. And when they come into your setting, be it your huge, a large setting, with your preschool room, your toddler room, your baby room, or be it, you've got 2 or 3 children in your home as a childminder, the children are entering into an adventure with you. And I always think that's such a lovely sort of thought, to think that when they come to you, right, the adventure starts. And I'd highly recommend looking at the link at the bottom of the slide there. Pookie Ponders. He always has such great terminology for things. I don't know what goes on in his mind some days, but yeah, definitely highly recommend reading that. And one thing I've always picked up from Greg Bottrell, I've read his book and I've read many articles, as lots of you know. I think he's fantastic. He uses 3 key words when he talks about what the environment should bring to the children and what you should see in the children. And you should see joy in what they're doing, you should see engagement in what they're doing, and there should be a purpose to what they're doing as well. And all of these things, we know if they're happy in what they're doing, they're inspired, they're ignited, that's going to support progression. We know ourselves, if you take up a new hobby and you really enjoy it, you want to do it better and better and better, so you'll keep trying at it. So for children, demonstrating the characteristics of effective teaching and learning. So yeah, definitely think about that emotional environment. So moving on to the next picture here. It's a fantastic picture of an amazing outdoor area provision, mud kitchen. It's more of a mud, a massive catering company by the looks of it. It's amazing. But what makes this area a powerful learning environment? Think to yourself now, does it cover all 7 areas of learning? You know, please contribute in the chat. What do you see? What do you think this would bring to what does it enable children to do? I'm sure there's many of us, we talked about this earlier, myself, Ali, Alison and Nikki, and we all sort of had different thoughts on what it would bring. You know, children are powerful learners, and it's amazing what they will make out of literally nothing. What would they do? What would some of the cohort you have at the moment do if they were offered this experience? You know, it's inviting, isn't it? It's exciting for them, and that's what we want. I mean, it also, you know, it offers those opportunities for that slightly risky play as well. You know, but it's thinking, is it well provided for? You know, we were talking earlier about a setting where, you know, they had a lovely mud kitchen, but there was actually no mud in it, and the children were basically digging up some of the sides on a pathway towards the mud kitchen because they were desperate for some mud in it. Unfortunately, I don't think the practitioners acknowledge this, but so it's making sure we're doing that. And I can see a couple of comments here. Cheryl's put, you know, social interaction, communication, characteristics of effective learning, risky play as well, like what I just said, so many things. Alison's put about objects such as the microwave that are familiar to children, so this will support that role play. Yeah, I think it is really important to think about having resources that are familiar to the children, but then adding in things that are slightly more exciting and those provocations, something they might not have seen before, but obviously you scaffolding, role playing, you know, supporting them with that introduction of that resource. And I thought of one of the things I first thought of when I saw this picture is, what would happen if we put an adult in there with the children? We're thinking about just letting the children in there, but ask the question to yourself, what do you think would happen if an adult was in that area with children? What could it lead to? Please put your comments in the chat. You know, a couple we thought of was, you know, it might lead to that sustained shared thinking occurring. But then something I also thought of was, you know, that adult who is in there with the children needs to know the children they're with obviously very well to be able to challenge, extend and support them with their individual needs as well, and you know, possible next steps. So it's really important that that adult is knowledgeable about those areas, you know, those children. Cheryl's put, it might be also interesting for the children who don't sit at the table, ones that sit watching TV. Yeah, this might encourage the child's self-esteem and interaction with peers and adults, definitely. Yeah, the adult could model mixing ingredients to make a cake. Yeah, that's Alison. And, you know, that sort of role play there, for example, if that was in the setting where I talked about that example of one of their curricular goals, aims was for every child to be able to complete a recipe to make a Play-Doh. You know, that role model, that role play there, making a cake would support that progression in learning. So yeah, just something to think about there. And what a lovely outdoor area. We're all now thinking, I wish we had one of those, and some of you may well. Okay, so now we are going to think a little bit about the learning environment. We're not going to go through every single one of these points. You can obviously take them away and consider about what you're setting. These are key points of what an enabling environment hopefully demonstrates. We know that children thrive within environments that support their individual and diverse development needs. Do you do this? Is this happening in your provision? If we move on down to, children's learning is best supported when they have opportunities which allow for movement and action, creativity and imagination, independence and collaboration. Can they access the resources, move them from one specific area? If they want to take the cars from the sort of possible construction area down near the sand tray, or if they want to take one of their favorite books outside and sit by a tree and look at it with some friends, or into the playhouse outside, are they able to do that, to continue with that independent learning and that collaboration and interaction with other children? Time outdoors, we know, benefits children by offering them those unique opportunities. So we need to make sure, is the learning transferable from inside to outside? And we were talking about this earlier, and it used to be very much you had to make sure everything inside was reflective outside, and it's not so much about that now. It's about making it exciting and inviting for the children outside, things that are new to spark and ignite their imagination. And I keep saying that about that spark. That's what, you want children to go, oh, look at that, I like that, I really want to look at that. A little bit like, I don't know about yourselves, but when you walk into a clothes shop, and you just see something, oh, I really like that, I've got to go and look at that and try that on because I really like that. That's what we want children to do when they see something new and exciting in their setting, particularly in as well in the outdoor. Always consider the outdoor is just as important as the indoor. And the last statement there, I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to go through every single one of them. It's about that knowledge the practitioners have to optimize that development and learning to support that progression. Really, really, really crucial. And we know that children thrive within these environments, don't we, that support their individual development. So consider, are your children making progress, and how you are supporting the children who may not be making progress through the environment. Are the resources exciting for them? Are they meeting those needs? So that differentiation comes in there again, thinking about that scissor progression document, the springy ones to start with. So making sure it meets those specific individual needs. So moving on, we've got a slide with resources activities mentioned within the educational programmes for those 3 prime areas. So I'm sure looking at this, you can think to yourselves, yep, we've got these. That is absolutely fantastic. The areas of learning detail some of these activities. And the development matters also give examples of resources. There's so many examples out there. The website we showed that the videos were on, there's lots of ideas on there. That's very, very new and a fantastic resource. And all of the things we've talked about, you can link in for ideas. But we need to make sure that, it supports that progression, and we increase the range of resources and challenges outside and indoors. So, for example, the development of resources. So with fine motor control, we might begin with sort of small hammers with plastic golf tees and Play-Doh, so children can slowly, without really hurting themselves or anything, just demonstrate that hand-to-eye coordination initially. And then when we, through our assessment of their needs, can see they're ready to progress, so we're demonstrating that progression and supporting it, we might introduce short handle hammers with nails and soft blocks of wood. So we're thinking to that next steps all the time, not just consistently leaving it with the light hammers and the plastic golf tees and Play-Doh. That progression in learning again. We all know that resources and learning experience that are offered does not just support one area of learning, but everybody in the team needs to be aware that, we all looked at that mud kitchen through different eyes, didn't we? We saw different things, but it's making sure that those new to the EYFS apprentices, we are all aware that everything, basically, we can link everything to every area. But in this session today, we're primarily obviously thinking about the prime areas, and they are really, really crucial. So, you know, I don't know if you want to comment on anything else that you can think of that supports all areas of learning. You know, there is so much out there. A couple of suggestions here come straight to mind. The role play area. You know, I think any role play area, you can basically get everything into a role play area. Play-Doh is another one that's not actually on this list here, but the list is, like we say, it's endless, isn't it? Story sacks are absolutely fantastic as well. Again, Alison's mentioned Neil Griffiths. Have a look at him, how he uses story sacks, etc. And you can create these yourself. They don't have to be the expensive ones you see from educational suppliers. If you've got a creative member of staff, get them sort of drawing characters and things. So many ideas. Games, board games are really fantastic to, you know, support with personal and social skills, taking turns. I actually know of a setting who are building up in partnership with their families an Orchard Toys, you know, the Orchard Games, the Orchard Toy Games boxes of some fantastic games there. And they're actually creating a library of these games for families to borrow as well. So extending, you know, key skills and progression in learning at home. Sand and water, you know, the list is endless, and we need to just make sure that staff are aware of how to expand on these activities and these resources. And Alison's mentioned earlier, and I hope I'm going to get this right, Alison, please tell me if I don't, Sue Rayner, who some of you may be aware of, a maths consultant, fantastic. If you ever get the chance to tune into anything, any training support she gives, please do. But she talks about resources that they must be complex, so making sure they're age appropriate. For example, they're generous. You know, is there enough of them, for example? Have you got enough for all the children to access and use effectively? And are they surprising? Do they bring something new, something different to what the children are doing? Again, that spark. Do they like excite the child when they see them? So think of those three words. And there's a couple more comments in the chat about, you know, lots of conversation about home life routines and relationships. I think that was linked back to the mud kitchen picture. And Alison's put just very simply, yeah, a big tin of buttons. Things like that can offer just, you know, something that not many children would see either. What's that? What's that for? Where's that come from? You think of that, the discussion, patterns, colours, every area of learning. Yeah, I'm just thinking about it now. Where did that come from? That used to be on such and such as clothes. Yeah. Well, why was there a hole in my trousers? You know, all of those things. So it's endless. It can go on. We need to move on, or I could talk about that, a tin of buttons forever. We haven't got long left. So yeah, open-ended resources, which the buttons are, leads very nicely in. They enable children to access and combine processes of development and learning, but you need to make sure, as the quote says, from birth to 5, that they're easily accessible, well organized, appealing. You know, I think, you know, yourself, I've been into some settings where, you know, I'm looking around thinking, oh my golly, I'm not too sure where they can sit and read a book, or I'm not too sure how they're going to get to that box of cards if they really want them. And if I'm thinking that, you wonder what the child may be thinking. So is that actually putting them off from accessing and using these resources? You know, I've talked about this before. Can they transfer the resources around to where they would like them? Are they challenging and extend the learning? And do the children play and use all the resources on offer? The learning environment audit I've talked about, that's available on our webpage. That gives you the opportunity to audit your provision, audit your resources. There's also resource ideas in that audit to you know, to enhance what you've already got or to develop an area. You know, and do you actually talk to the children, if they are age appropriate, obviously, about what they might like, you know, in their setting, in their provision, to support their learning? Is there something that they would really, really like? But the two pictures on here just show those simple things. You know, we're coming up to Christmas, aren't we? And it's the age-old saying, parents spend lots of money on a gift and then the children just play with the box. And look at that little girl in that box, you know. I can remember the days when there were deliveries to the school, and I used to just tell the secretary, make sure you bring all the admin officers, make sure you bring the boxes to me, because it'll keep them, you know, keep them entertained for hours. And it did. You know, and that's like slightly on the curiosity approach, the children there with the real cups and saucers, you know, making a good old cup of tea, that process is familiar to them, but it's exciting because I'm sure there's not many of us who have cups and saucers like that in our homes. They might just come out on a special day when Granny comes to visit, you know, but it's just thinking out of the box and making it exciting for the children. So focusing here, I won't read all of this because it's very small print. How the image in the centre there, the little boy and girl there, obviously exploring water play. We don't know exactly what they're doing. We haven't been able to observe them, but those 7 areas of learning in that wheel, including the characteristics of effective learning, how that one interaction, that one activity, probably self-chosen by them, is linking to all of those areas. You know, they're cooperating in personal and social. They're probably expressing their own ideas to each other for communication and language. There's gross motor, carrying the water, controlling their bodies so they don't spill things, and fine motor, pouring possibly from one container to another. Language and experience in that discussion, you know, for literacy is going to support their comprehension skills. Maths, they're investigating volume, weight, height, because there's some posts near there. You don't know, they might be balancing things. You know, understanding the world. They're playing together within those customs of the setting. They understand what the expectations are in their provision. Expressive arts and design, they're using the resources to develop ideas. And the characteristics of effective teaching and learning, they're finding out through trial and error. Can I carry this that far? Will it spill? Etc. etc. So you can see how simple choice can support, and that's without me even commenting there on what an adult could bring to that as well. So continuing on the next slide, considering how children interact with the environment and how we enable this to occur positively. This is just a quick quote here, and I'm not going to read this out for you, about how an adult considered Helen Bromley considered her approach when she was in a setting to what she was doing, and were children not going to that area because she was always there. And it actually made me think that sometimes, I've got to be honest with you, on the occasional day, this is what I would do. I would sit possibly at a table and, you know, just jot a few things down, a few observations. And did children not come to that area then because I was there? You know, if I'd moved away, would they have interacted in that area? So it's really important to think about how you are placed in that environment as well. And in the green bubble here, do you stand back and observe resource and activities being used? You audit your provision again, and do you observe adult deployment? The learning environment lends itself very well to that. And when I was in a setting, which was a few years ago now, we used a quality assurance scheme. Some of you may have heard of it. It was called EAL, Effective Early Learning. And it obviously, we tracked and observed children, looked at their levels of engagement using the Leuven scales of engagement, which again, they are attached to the learning environment audit. And one thing that was highlighted to us, from tracking where children interacted in the environment, was that they were not accessing and demonstrating their observations maths, and there was low levels of progression in maths. And so obviously it was linking up by observing. We did peer-to-peer observations as well, and we were not bringing maths into our scaffolding, into our discussions with children, into our teaching with them. So we improved on all of that, and the outcomes and the progression improved significantly. So it's well worth, you know, you don't have to join up to a specific scheme. You can track children and audit your provision quite simply and hopefully effectively as well. So finally, in this section, we just have a quick look at structures and routines. And it's thinking about, you know, like the bubbles here, I've picked out a couple of things. Do the routines help children to feel comfortable and settled? You know, routines are crucial to support positive behaviour. They give the children that feeling of security, and children need that predictable routine as well, because it again makes them feel safe, and they can then develop that sense of mastery in handling their lives. So think about your routines. do they support those learning opportunities, you know, at every moment? I think Alison touched on this earlier. You know, Nikki's written in the examples here. She visited a setting where the babies were changed in you know, obviously safely and hygienically in the disabled toilet facility, but the practitioners have put posters on the walls, and you know, there was a little basket of bits and bobs for them to hold, and the practitioner, the interaction was there. You know, it was actually a really it had been made a really inviting area. And I've actually seen this in a childminder's home as well. Big up the childminders here, where their toilet is upstairs. So, you know, they've had to take a toddler up when they're toilet training. So they've had to take the 2 other early years children with them. And in their sort of landing area at the top, obviously with a stair gate and very safely, they've got that nice sort of couple of soft cushions, a basket of sort of toys to explore, and some books linked to what's happening in the setting at that time. So thinking and using every opportunity as a teaching moment with that running commentary from the practitioner as well. So think about how you monitor those daily routines, you know, at snack, at mealtime, tidy up time, those structure and routines, the things that happen every day that we might even say sometimes can be a little bit dull. Are they used effectively to support children's learning opportunities and obviously then support progression? Thank you. And then back to Alison just for the last few slides.
Yeah, thanks, Jo. That's brilliant. We have only got a minute or so left, so yeah. Just to remind everybody, really, and again, we've talked a lot about staff development, supporting staff. We have a whole load of pre-recorded training that we did earlier in the year, some more recently as well, including just introductions and preparations for the EYFS 2021. And although it's already in place, lots of like applicable things still, and obviously the list there including characteristics, self-regulation, preparing for Ofsted, and focusing on special educational needs, the coordinator, and in terms of what the reforms mean for them. So if you haven't had chance to access any of them or some of them, then please do take the time. The links are there for you to go on to. We do have an enabling, just a bit of a plug, enabling environments workshop, which will go into more depth on and above what Jo's already done tonight, and that's on the 23rd of November, 7 till 9:30. That is a virtual session, and the link is at the bottom of the screen as well. So please go on to that if you'd like to access that. Okay, so it's literally to the wire. Any questions from anybody? We have just got a couple of, Nikki always ends training with beautiful, beautiful quotes. So while people are thinking of questions, if they want to ask them, let's put them up. So the EYFS curriculum, as children grow, the prime areas will help them to develop skills in 4 specific areas. We know that, but equally, it shouldn't matter how slowly a child learns as long as we are encouraging them not to stop. So, you know, we're powerful in terms of helping them progress, but we're equally powerful in stopping that progress. So just make sure that you're doing everything you can to support the children, using every moment to do that. And thank you so much for attending tonight. We always appreciate people coming out and taking time out of their precious evenings. And thank you so much to the Chard, Ilminster and Crewkerne early years community. I know Carly and Cheryl have been here all night. Claire popped in earlier. Thank you so much. Again, I think your community is really lucky to have you putting on such great training. So yeah, see you all soon, everybody. And any questions in the interim?
If you could just spend a couple of minutes very quickly filling in the evaluation, we would really appreciate it. A quote from Nikki, she always says we have broad shoulders as a team, and we do look at your feedback, and it does influence, you know, training and what we choose to do in the future. So we would really appreciate just a couple of seconds of your time to do that. Thank you very much, everybody.
Have you popped that one in the chat, have you, Jo?
Yeah, I have. Yeah,
brilliant. Yeah.
Excellent.
Oh, Claire, you're still here, so you didn't just pop in. You were here all the time. Sorry.
I say a really, really big thank you to the early years team, and especially for you two and for Nikki to putting all the presentations together. This is very, very well done. It was really good and lots of information, and definitely a lot of information I'll take back, and the team are here, and it's really opened our eyes to how the prime areas can be involved with the children's education. But yes, thank you ever so much. And as mentioned, it will be recorded, or it is recorded, and we'll be able to send you the link to everybody so you can share that knowledge. But thank you once again, both of you. And as I said, if there's any questions that you've got now, if not, ask us. We'll email it to us at EYC, and I'm sure we'll be able to get the answers from yourselves at a later date.
What I'll do, Cheryl, I'm just going to put my email address in the chat. So if anybody wants to contact me, and I'll obviously let you know if questions come through, because that presumably would be useful for you to see the kind of interaction you're getting with your community. But yeah, anything else in the future, if we want to go into more depth, if you want to do a review of the year, you know, later on in the summer term, maybe, you know, there's all things that we can facilitate for you, but obviously depends on what your community wants. So yeah, thank you.
We have got a follow-up, Alison, already booked, haven't we? We've got a second session with you in the spring.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we've got them booked in. So still to determine the content, isn't it? So we just need to think about what people need. Yeah.
So we'd really like any feedback off anybody who's joined this one to say, where would you like us to go next? Because we've already booked another 2-hour session. So please do say if there's space on your feedback form or whatever, because we'd really like you to shape that training so it's what you need.
When we could do a deep dive into any of the areas of learning and really kind of start to explore together about progression of learning in specific steps, as an example, you know, we could do something like that if people would find it helpful, or, you know, ultimately anything else that would support.
That's what the CIC, you know, is all about, is trying to bridge that gap of what the needs that practitioners need, isn't it? And we can source that from yourselves to get that information. But it was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
No, it's our pleasure. Thank you.
No problem. Are you able just to stay on just at the end, Alison and George?
Of course.
Just questions. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody. As mentioned, there's the evaluation form at the bottom. We will be sending our own evaluation out by email and a certificate. It's just that we can get that information to then put into our report for the early years team. Very grateful if you could fill that in for your feedback. All right. Thank you, everybody. Hopefully now you can go and get a cup of tea and share that information with your teams tomorrow. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stop the recording.
Thank you. And if you could send us the chat if possible.